Hello, my terrific students. I hope you are doing well. Welcome to First Chapter Fridays. And this week we are going to be reading the first two chapters of I Survived the Children's Blizzard of 1888. Now, there are many I Survived books. They are wonderful, phenomenal. They're geared towards um, third, fourth grade age groups, and they are based off of a true life event and then have fictional characters interjected into those scenarios. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we will get started. Okay. The Children's Blizzard of 1888. January 12th, 1888. Prairie Creek, Dakota Territory, around 10 a.m. A deadly blizzard raged across the prairie, and 11-year-old John Hale was trapped in a frozen nightmare. The wind screamed in his ears as he staggered through the blinding snow. His whole body was numb. The monster storm had come out of nowhere, a massive black cloud moving faster than a train. The temperature plunged, the wind howled, and then roar! The sky exploded like a bomb, blasting snow and ice through the air. Ground up ice raked John's eyes like tiny claws. The furious wind pounded him, tore at him, spun him around. He felt like he was locked in a cage with a ferocious beast trying to rip him to pieces. And then a screaming gust picked up John and slammed him down. He tried to rise to his feet, but the wind was too strong. Snow was piling on top of him, burying him in an icy grave. John felt his flesh freezing on his bones. His body's warmth was seeping out of him like blood leaking out of an open wound. John had never wanted to move west to this wide open prairie. He was a city kid, not a tough pioneer. And now the the manic wind was hissing in his ears, taunting him. "You're weak. You'll never make it. You're doomed." The terrifying, evil wind was the last sound John heard as he was buried alive. Chapter 2. About 4 months earlier, September 19th, 1887, Prairie Creek, Dakota Territory, 7:45 a.m. John's little sister Franny had disappeared. She and John were on their way to their schoolhouse. They were halfway through the 3-mile walk from their farm. They were following an old wagon trail that cut through the tall golden grass. Franny, who was 5, had been skipping up ahead. John had been watching her blonde braids flap up and down like the wings of a happy yellow bird. Somehow, he lost sight of her. John sped up, looking all around. He was hard to see through the grass, which rose up so high it tickled his neck. A unicorn could be prancing by, and John wouldn't notice. "Franny!" he shouted. "Where are you?" "Whoosh!" said the wind. "Whoosh!" said the grass. But no sign of Franny. John sighed. She must be playing hide and seek, her favorite game. When Franny found a good spot, she'd sit there forever. She was going to make him late. It was hard enough for John to go to school where he had no friends, but his teacher, Miss Ruelle, was mean. He pictured her now, her hair stretched back in a bun, her eyes glaring through her little round glasses. She was young and barely 5 feet tall, but she ruled over the schoolhouse like a Civil War general. John had never once seen her smile. When kids were late, Miss Ruelle made them stay in for recess and memorize some boring poem. Torture! "Franny!" John shouted. He stood on his tiptoes, peering into the distance. All he could see in any direction was wide open prairie. It seemed too stretched out forever, an ocean made of grass. He still couldn't get used to it. All this empty land. John and Franny and their parents had moved here to Dakota about a year ago from Chicago. It wasn't John's idea. He'd been happy living in the city. But Ma and Pa were fed up with their dark little apartment, their cursing neighbors, and their the noise and stink that rose up from the street. For years, Ma and Pa had talked about moving out west and buying a farm, but John always figured that was just their crazy dream, like John wishing he could be a pitcher of the Chicago White Stockings, his favorite baseball team. Pa didn't make much money working at the cabinet shop. They couldn't How could they ever afford to buy land for a farm? Then Ma and Pa heard that they could get land in the place called Dakota. It was thousands of miles of open space west of Minnesota. Dakota wasn't a state, but it would be soon, folks said. And the government wanted farmers to come. They were even giving away big plots of land for free. All you had to do was build a farm and stay for 5 years. Then the land was yours forever. For Ma and Pa, it was a dream come true. We're heading west. Pa boomed. We'll be pioneers, Ma said. John hoped the West would be like the places in his favorite adventure stories, with rivers filled with gold nuggets and brave sheriffs chasing after famous bank robbers like Billy the Kid. Ma and Pa sold practically everything they owned. They traveled west on a train. It took 7 days to reach the edge of Dakota Territory. Then they bought a rickety old wagon and an ox to pull it. John named the ox Shadow after his favorite white stocking pitcher, Shadow Pile. It was a 2-day ride to the little town of Prairie Creek. If you could call it a town, only about 20 families lived there, on little farms scattered across the prairie. The main street was a dusty strip of dirt with a general store on one side and a hardware store and a tiny hotel on the other. John's family settled on a 160-acre piece of land about 2 miles outside of town. There were no rivers with gold, no brave sheriffs. There wasn't even a bank for a guy like Billy the Kid to rob. There was only empty space and endless work. John and Pa were sometimes out in the fields from dawn till dark. Ma hardly ever stopped scrubbing and cooking and sweeping. Franny's scrawny little arms had sprouted muscles from hauling buckets of water from the well. And the weather, oh, the roasting summer sun, the thunderstorms that blackened the skies, winter days so cold your spit froze before it could hit the ground, blizzards that came out of nowhere. Last winter, the snow piled up almost to the rooftop. Pa had to dig a tunnel to get to the house, from the house to the barn. But for John, the worst part was the emptiness. He got a lonely feeling when he looked out over the prairie, an ache inside of him. It felt like the cold wind blowing right through his chest. John didn't belong here. He felt stranded in the middle of nowhere. And now Miss Ruelle was going to punish him for being late. Franny! But wait, what if Franny wasn't playing a game? She could have wandered too far in the grass and gotten lost. Last year, a little boy from town disappeared. Minute he was chasing jackrabbits behind his family's house, and the next minute he vanished. John and Pa joined the big search, but the poor kid was never found. It was like the prairie had opened its grassy jaws and swallowed him whole. John cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled from the top of his lungs, Franny! The grass whished and wind moaned. A flock of geese honked across the bright blue sky, but no sign of Franny. All right, I hope you enjoy the first few chapters, and I hope that you go and check this book out. Have a great day.